Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. This presentation is called Parenting Outside the Box. As you can see here, this is based on a book I wrote and published a few years ago. And the reason I wrote the book was I thought I had sort of struck on some very basic ideas about parenting that might be helpful, not only to parents of sort of non-mainstream teenagers like we've had at North Hills Prep, but kind of teenagers everywhere and parents everywhere. I had written a book before that called The Oppositional Teenager, and that was more focused on non-mainstream teens and kids who, for whatever reason, either because of mental health issues or defiance, that kind of thing, were out of the mainstream, and sort of strategies there for understanding why they do what they do and what parents can do to sort of help them. And in the course of doing so, because it was written for parents, like I said, I think I hit on some ideas that I thought were sort of broad and general and might be helpful to parents in general. So that's how I came upon parenting outside the box. And basically what you're going to get here are 7 basic strategies for approaching parenting your teenager. So I try to keep it simple. You know, in these kinds of presentations, there's usually a magic number of some sort. 3, 7, 10 are popular numbers, and 7 worked for this. And so what you'll see in these slides here is I'm going to give you these 7 things. Will be up quite a bit, so it will get sort of driven into your minds by being there, and then I'll highlight whatever section I'm working on. The overall picture that I'm looking for is, as you can see highlighted in red, what I call a different way of being. And what a different way of being is sort of a mindset that I think parents can benefit by getting to. And my premise with sort of everything I do is that if you can get into the right state of mind, then what you do in particular situations sort of naturally follows. And I think my overall idea here is, and this is especially true with parenting tough teenagers, if you try to go to battle with them, you end up in a battle that usually goes nowhere. So the trick is not to be, you know, sort of an aggressive warrior. The trick is to sort of be a Zen master, and the Zen master knows how to sort of dodge and you know, knows how to step in and step back and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what I'm going for here, and what I'm going to do is use these 7 strategies to support that different way of being. Kind of base this on what they call systems theory. Systems theory says any kind of system is a bunch of interrelated parts, and if you change one part of the system, then the whole system changes. So for instance, in the natural world, if you come upon a pond and it sort of exists in nature and has its natural ecology, if you were to, I don't know, put a pesticide there and kill off some of the bugs, then the birds are affected and everything is affected within the system. Well, we apply the same thing to psychology and families. And the reason that's important here is oftentimes teenagers who are having some trouble or just being teenagers and being difficult in the way that teenagers sometimes can be, they don't want to go to therapy. They don't want to change. They don't necessarily want to be seen as having a problem. And I understand that because I think none of us want that. Because of that, I sort of shift the focus here to parents. And sometimes parents, you know, don't necessarily like hearing that. But the whole idea of a different way of being is, I think, be a shock absorber rather than a nuclear reactor. That's my standard line. I got a couple of chuckles from my audience, and I appreciate that. Because it's so easy to be a nuclear reactor, because what will happen is teenagers will really challenge you in a very fundamental way. And we all want power and control in our lives because we have so little power and control in sort of the big cosmic picture of things. And so we try to control what we can. And of course, with our kids, because we've raised them usually from the time they're babies and, you know, put in so many hours and so much time and changed those diapers and dealt with their illnesses and worked them along all the transitions through infancy to toddlerdom to, you know, young childhood and navigating schools and everything. Being a parent is so much work, and it's so challenging that, you know, we want to control what happens as they get older, but as they get older and they start spreading their wings and get more of their own sort of power and influence, they become harder and harder to control. And because of that, I think we have to try to influence them. So I shift the responsibility away from teenagers and to parents. And what I say to parents is, take responsibility for what's going on. It's not that your teenager has a problem, it's that you have a problem. And the advantage to that, while we never want to hear that we have a problem, but the advantage to that is we can change ourselves more easily than we can change our teenagers. So in order to shift the system of our family and deal with a kid who might be sort of troublesome, if we can sort of change how we're reacting and how we're behaving, we can get them to change. And as I say it here, your teenager doesn't have a problem, you have a problem. And usually, your problem is your relationship with your teenager, in the way I look at things. Part of the way that I sort of learned my way into this stuff, in addition to having my own kids, is worked here as a therapist and then more prominently for a number of years as a dean of students. And the dean of students' job is to kind of keep things safe and make sure people are behaving properly. And in an environment like we have at North Hills Preparatory, everybody is not behaving properly all the time. And with kids who are a little bit defiant and a little bit oppositional, my experience has been that if you come on strong and really, you know, sort of be aggressive in your approach with them, you'll lose them. And they'll become defiant toward you. They'll see you as an authority figure. They're already sort of not liking authority figures as they're beginning to spread their wings and be people in the world. And so our job is not necessarily to try to, you know, sort of hammer them into proper behavior, but to influence them into proper behavior. And there's a number of ways, as we're going to see in this, that you can do that. But if you look at the problem being your relationship with your teenager, rather than that they're acting poorly, you can kind of work on it in a way that you can't work on them directly. So in a sense, this is kind of an indirect approach. Okay? You're working on yourself and you're doing this in a subtle way. Again, you're being a Zen master, not necessarily an aggressive warrior. Now, another of our strategies, the second one is to get their respect. And I know when I grew up, 60s, 70s primarily, there was something called the generation gap. And kids and parents were not really close with each other in those days. I think it's gradually changed over the course of time. And I know with my parents, and my parents were pretty mild and pretty good, but the assumption was that you respected your elders. And, you know, when we are the elders, you know, we want that natural respect. Not everybody thinks that way anymore. A lot of kids, and especially kids that have run into problems or who for various reasons are defiant or out of the mainstream, they are desperate for respect. And they don't want to respect you unless they know that you respect them. And if you're disrespectful toward them, they're going to go to war with you. So I think a great way to build the relationship is to bend over backwards to provide a respectful relationship toward your kid. How do you do it? You say please, you say thank you, you don't You don't demean things that they're interested in. You're never critical. I'll say that over and over again. Never be critical in any relationship you're in. Your husband-wife relationship, friend relationships. Never criticize the person, and especially with kids. You can comment on behavior, challenge behavior, but never the person themselves. And so the way to get respect is to be respectful toward your kid. Get respect, give respect. This builds your relationship. Remember, going back to this over and over again, you're going to take on a different way of being because your basic premise is if I have as good a relationship with my kid, with my teenager as possible, then I still have influence over them. I can't control them. I'm not going to be with them all the time. They're not going to want to be controlled. But I can try to influence. And these are all ways to influence. Okay? So we're going to take responsibility. We're going to work on getting respect. We're also going to parent with purpose. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you ask parents what their job is, they often say, well, my job is to love my kid. My job is to, you know, take care of them financially and provide for them. And I think that those are sort of accurate. But I want to kind of give you another way of looking at it. I kind of identify three things, and what I say to myself with my kids is in every sort of interaction I have with them or sort of parenting strategy I use, I keep these three things in mind, and I share that with them, okay? So I want my kid to be safe, and I want to teach them, hey, there are perils in the world, and my job is to raise you to independence, to get to the point where you can take care of yourself. That's my job, okay? So I'm going to teach you how to be safe. I'm going to help build your self-esteem. You don't have to necessarily say that to your kid directly, but you keep it in mind because you want them to feel good about yourselves. And I can tell you as a person who's worked in schools for a long time, I'm coming from a therapeutic angle. I am much more interested in kids feeling good about themselves than being able to do every last little bit of academic work that we throw at them. And then the third thing is we're leading toward independence so that they can do more and more things for themselves. So I think that, you know, I know for me this works. If I keep these three things in mind, safety, self-esteem, and independence, and as I'm having an interaction with my kid, I can bring that up. And let me give you a couple of examples. For instance, kid wants to go out to a party. Fine, that's a natural thing that's going to happen. Those of us who have grown up know what happens at parties. Some of them are calm and safe, and many of them aren't. And there's alcohol, and there's possibly drugs, and there's possibly people acting crazy. And a lot of our kids drive, or they're going to get into cars with people who drive and maybe, you know, have done alcohol or drugs or that kind of thing. That's a conversation I'm going to have. Where are you going to be? What's going on there? If I'm going to let you go, how are we going to stay in touch? What's our sort of rule here? What's our plan? What's our strategy? So I want to give them the independence to go out and show that I trust them to take care of themselves. But maybe I don't trust 100%, and I want my kid to stay in touch with me. So maybe I want them to text me every couple of hours or something like that. Or maybe I'm going to put a curfew there because nothing good ever happens after midnight. That's sort of a standard. You know, my job is to make sure you're safe. I want you to be independent. I want you to go. I want you to have a good time. I want all that stuff. But I also want you to be safe, and I need to know that you're safe. So there's a way, and I'll talk more about this later, there's a way to do this negotiation when you keep these three things in mind in terms of your interactions with them. This is one, the fourth strategy is to role model happiness. This is one that's so difficult because, you know, you ask anybody what they want out of life and they'll typically say, I want to be happy. And I think we all want to be happy in various ways, whether it's financially, with our work, in our relationships, that kind of thing. But lots of times parents who have tough kids have had a hard time with the happiness thing. And so they're not necessarily, I mean, this is all of us. We're not necessarily great role models all the time. So part of what we need to do, and you know, it's funny, there was a radio, so there used to be, and nowadays I don't think there's any of this, but there were these radio psychologists that became popular primarily in the 70s. And there was a guy named David Viscott who wrote some books, and he's since passed on, and there were a few others, but that was a popular sort of radio thing that happened for a while. I used to listen to a lot of that. And David Viscott's thing was, I stole it from him, and I give him credit. Your main obligation to your kid is to be happy, because if you're happy, then you're role modeling this kind of happiness, and they learn from you. And even if they're so oppositional and they tell you they hate you and all that kind of stuff, they're learning a lot from you. And if you have it together, and none of us has it all together all the time, but if you basically have it together and you know how to be happy in various ways, because you're taking care of yourself, because you do work that you like, because you have interests and hobbies and things that you do that make you feel good, they pick up on that stuff. They learn, because a lot of stuff happens in an indirect kind of way. So it's something for us really to keep in mind. If we're angry, what we're showing them is that the world makes us angry. If we're lazy, we're showing them that, well, life is hard, and so I just kind of want to kick back and take it easy. On the other hand, if we're feeling good and we get up in the morning and we like going to work and we have a smile on our face and we have things that we like to do, they're going to learn from us in that way. So keep that in mind. That's really a big one, and it's not always easy, but it's something that, you see I put that quote up there, but that's something that's a real challenge, and not something you would typically think of when you kind of learn about parenting strategies. And like I said, I stole that one from the dearly departed Dr. Viscott, but it really struck a chord with me. And I think it's something for us to keep in mind. We're teaching them how to be happy, but we're doing it in sort of an indirect way. Fifth strategy, understand psychodynamics. I think I have 3 things that I would want you to keep in mind. Number 1, teenagers are, as part of their normal development, are separating from us. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go from the cocoon, which is the family of origin, and gradually through school and through wider relationships, separate from us. And remember, what our real goal is, right, and the goal of any parent, I think, in the animal kingdom, let alone human beings, is to prepare kids to be adults so that they can go off in the world and take care of themselves, okay? So as they're reaching for independence, we need to be aware of that. So when a kid says, you don't know what you're talking about, or I hate you, or you don't know anything, yeah, we don't like hearing that, but on the other hand, they're just trying to assert themselves. When they want to go out and we don't think it's, the right thing to do, they're just trying to assert themselves. And so our job is to understand that, so that we're able to tolerate the challenges that they have to us. For a lot of kids, the way they learn to be independent is to rebel against you, right? They know that you love them, and so you're safe to rebel against, because you're going to love them no matter what. And so they'll tend to challenge you in that way because they know it's okay to do that. The other part of it, that's the adolescent dynamics, is seeking out separation and freedom. Parent dynamics are often overlooked. And we raise our kids and we put so much work into them that it's easy to get overly invested in kids. And what I mean by that, and I think this is sort of a good image, but I think between parents and children, even adult children, there's an invisible umbilical cord that continues to exist, but it's psychological, and it's sort of psychological and theoretical, but it's there. So our kids, they're our little representatives out in the world. They're us. We're sort of so invested in them that what happens to them kind of happens to us. And they're our little representatives out in the world, so if they mess up, it's almost like we're messing up, or our reputation gets sort of sullied because, you know, they've messed up out in the world a little bit. And that doesn't mean loving them any less, but understand that they're separate people who are going to figure things out on their own. Now, they're going to get our help, they're going to get the help of other people, but they've got their own course to live, and we have to let them live it. We have to let them make their mistakes, scrape their knees, be there to pick them up when it happens, but understand that that we can't control everything, and that it's so easy to get over-invested. It's so easy to play out your own issues on your kid, and you're probably going to damage your relationship with them if you do that. Lots of us sort of need our kids to be a certain way or want our kids to be a certain way for various reasons. Maybe we made mistakes or missteps, and you know, your intentions are so good. I've been there. Your intentions are so good, and you want to help your kids not make the same mistakes that you made, but they want to make their own mistakes. And I know for me, in this work that I've done here, it's always frustrating because, you know, you've lived your 50 years or whatever it is, and you so much want to share the real knowledge that you've picked up. And the thing about it that's so frustrating is the kids want to figure it out for themselves. And I know I was that way. I didn't want to listen to adults. So there's an art to how you kind of share your wisdom with them. And it's very tricky. But the first thing you have to do in order to be able to do that is recognize that you might be over-invested in your kid and allow them to be who they're going to be. Most every one of them figures it out. They do ultimately figure it out. You know, so part of what we do is, number one, and this was said to me once and it really stuck. Number one, you know, keep them alive. Number two, just be there for them so that they always know that you're there and you're not rejecting. And it's not always easy to do, but if you can be that person who creates enough of an area for them to sort of fumble along and figure things out, you'll do well. And if you keep that relationship strong, what will happen is, well, let me go back, and this ties into role modeling happiness. If you keep your relationship with your kid relatively strong, and you live a relatively strong life, you're providing them with a tremendous amount. You're being a great role model for them, and you're there to pick them up when they mess up, because they are going to mess up, just like we're going to mess up, because that's the way life is. We fumble along. The other thing I put in here, this dynamic called sharing it out, just something to understand is people do this all the time. And what I'm getting at there is you have a strong feeling inside of you. And I know for men it's usually anger. For women it could be anger, but it's often sadness, you know, or it's fear, that kind of thing. Those primary sort of emotions that we feel, primary negative emotions, are sort of anger, sadness, and fear. And what happens is when we feel that inside, we sort of want to get it out. And what teenagers do a lot of times is they want to provoke it out of you. So I'm a teenager, I'm pissed off, I'm going to figure out how to get you pissed off, okay? And we do it too. You see parents, I know, I've been through it, you come home, you've had a horrible day, you come home, your kid has left, you know, stuff laying around, and you give it to them. Now if you're in a better state of mind, you're able to sort of absorb it, and it's like, you know, Sue, you got to pick your stuff up. Please, please, you know. If you're in a bad place, you come home, God, you know, you never, that kind of thing. So understand that about yourself, and understand your kid might be doing it too. So there's these, you know, again, there's these dynamics, these invisible things going on. Your kid pressing for independence, you kind of, whether you're aware of it or not, kind of holding on and wanting to control them, and then all these other sort of daily interactions that go on that can kind of complicate things. And I go back to the same thing. What we're really talking about here is keeping a strong relationship with your kid. That doesn't mean that you're friends, doesn't mean that you're buddy-buddy. It means that you have this sort of mutual respect, and in a way you're taking care of them, and in a way they're taking care of you also. But you keep it as good as possible. This is a big one to me, this next one, what I call encouraged thinking. I would say if there's nothing else that is important to me in terms of the work that I do in a setting like this, and as a therapist, but even in all my interactions, what I'm really trying to do is encourage thinking. And what goes on just in terms of normal development, when you start with a young child, they're all feeling and very little thinking. And what happens over the course of time is that our cognitive processes, our thinking processes develop, and we're able to sort of balance those out. And I think a lot of people would say, you know, we think a little bit more. Our thinking side becomes more dominant, because if our feeling side is dominant, we're going to get ourselves in all kinds of trouble. Because feelings tend not to be logical, they're complicated with so many things. And an example of this is, you know, you go to the store, you see something, you like it, you want it. If we go by feeling, what Freud called the id, the pleasure principle, you know, you want to buy everything that you like. And there's another little voice in your head, that cognitive thing sitting on your shoulder saying, well, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Let me think my way through this. If I buy that, I'm not going to have enough money for this, and I want to do that kind of thing. See, teenagers, when they're not at that level yet, they haven't used their minds for quite as long. They're still in that process of developing the cognitive things. And I know in terms of brain anatomy and physiology, there are certain parts of the brain that develop until kids are about 25 or so. So as teenagers, that side of that part of your brain that really can think through in a deep way is not well developed yet. So how do you do that? How do you encourage thinking? And the way is to be a great conversationalist. You're keeping your relationship with your kid by having conversations, and having the right kinds of conversations. Conversations that show that you're interested, that you respect what they're saying, that you're really listening to them, that you're not going to be critical, those kinds of things. And I think in the books I have a kind of an example, and I don't think I can play it out exactly, but kid comes and says, you know, oh, the idiot teacher, and the parent says, how could you say such a thing? You should be respecting your teachers. Ah, but he was doing this and that, and it's, oh, come on, you know, that's ridiculous for you to behave that way. On the flip side, the kid might be saying the same thing. Oh, you know, how the idiot teacher was doing this, and the parent says something like that, something like, wow, I wonder what the teacher was thinking. Wow, I wonder what the teacher felt. And being a great conversationalist, and I think this is true of being a great therapist also. I know for me, as I've gotten better at it, I talk less and I ask the right questions. And so all you have to do with your kids is ask questions. Try to get into their experience, understand how they feel. Don't argue with them. Don't challenge them. Make it a conversation, because the more you're able to do that, you know, when people talk, they think. That's sort of, and if you're like me, and a lot of people are like this, talking is sort of a way of thinking out loud. And so when you give kids the opportunity to talk and think through things and ask them questions that require them to sort of, you know, think and figure out answers to what you're asking, and then venture off on their own, you're advancing their thinking processes. The more they think, the better they get at thinking. The better they get at thinking, the more they're able to sort of navigate the complexities that they're going to face in life. So you really want to encourage the thinking. And again, it's through conversation, and it's taking that stance, you know, sort of tying together everything that we're saying. Way of being, sort of the Zen master. You're taking responsibility for the relationship. You're not expecting them to change. You're going to do some changes, and they're going to react to that, and then they're going to change. You do it by being respectful. You parent with purpose. You're thinking about safety. You're thinking about independence. You're thinking about their self-esteem. You be a role model for those kinds of things. You understand the dynamics that are going on, their desire to separate, your desire to hold on, and then all the little nasty things that go on when you share time and space with people that you're related to. You have conversations to encourage thinking, and then you use your leverage. What's your leverage? Well, your leverage is that you have access to things that they want, and it's usually financial stuff. Sometimes it's control of their time, but other times it's financial stuff. And what I see all the time with really parents, mostly, and affluent parents, is they give their kid a cell phone, they give their kid a game thing, they give their kid this with no conditions. And then they come back and they say to someone like me, when they're frustrated, I give and I give and I give and I give and I give. And my kid doesn't respect it. My kid doesn't appreciate it. And sometimes we have kids that do appreciate it, and sometimes we have kids that don't, and there's middle ground in between. But lots of times parents give away all their leverage, and then they say, I don't have any leverage. Well, you gave it away. So with some kids, depending on who they are, it has to be what I would call give and take, okay? And teenagers think that give and take means you give and I take. And it's not like that. It has to be a negotiation. It's just like any other business negotiation or conversation. And partly that's what we're teaching them here in terms of building their independence, that there's conditions. We don't get something for nothing. Now, if your kids are appreciative and you're able to, and I've had one of each with my older kids. You know, some kids are just naturally appreciative, and some kids, the more you give, sort of the more they want. You have to put conditions on these things, and it can't be a power game where you're lording your power over them, but, you know, I want a cell phone. I mean, everybody has one now, or most people do, but within that, okay, I'm willing to get you the cell phone. It's going to cost this much money. What am I going to get in return? Well, I don't know. What do you want? Well, here's the conditions. You know, you've got to take out the trash, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. If you do that, then we have a fair relationship. We're in balance, and when things are in balance in a relationship, we're okay. But if it gets out of balance, if I'm finding that you're not doing this, this, and this, I'm not going to get mad at you. I'm not going to get frustrated. I'm just going to turn it off, and you're going to have to figure out how to get your own cell phone. So this is the art of negotiation, and I think it's a good thing to teach kids. I don't think this is something that typically comes up in parenting things, and again, that's why I called this outside the box. I tried to hit on a couple of things that aren't typical. But you have to be a good negotiator and teach them to negotiate and teach them this sort of give and take process. And if you keep that in mind, I think it really helps build the relationship. I'm going to give you a little bonus here. So in the course of writing the previous book, Oppositional Teenager, really reflected on some of the things I was seeing with kids who struggle, and I just want to share that with you really quickly because I think it adds to this whole thing. What I kind of found was a lot of the kids I was working with felt powerless and felt inadequate. And you know, a lot of our kids in a school like this, they're in special education. And while they might not admit it, lots of times they feel less than because they're in special education. And I think that's largely unconscious, but sometimes conscious. I'm not normal, I'm not the same as everybody, that kind of thing. Now, kids are sort of naturally powerless feeling. If you think about how we grow up, when we're tiny, we have no power. And gradually, you know, I've got this at home with one of my little ones. You know, actually, both of them, now that I think about it. You know, once they learn how to say no, you know, you're in this whole different sort of ball game, and that just kind of continues as things go on. So there's this constant sort of power thing where we all want to do this. We want to exert our power in the world because it's so easy to feel powerless. And so what we need to do with kids who are kind of at risk because they feel especially powerless or especially inadequate is try to build up their feelings of power and their feelings of adequacy. How do we do that? Well, partly by understanding that, you know, school and academics isn't the be-all and end-all of everything. There have been many people in this world and in this country and our society who weren't necessarily great at school who did just fine once they went out in the world. So to me, the trick is to try to find at least one thing that they want to do, that they want to pursue. Because really for most of us, it ends up being sort of where we go anyway. It isn't about getting straight A's in all your classes or anything like that, but it's about finding one thing that you absolutely love. And maybe it's, you know, designing websites or something like that. Or maybe it's sales, or maybe it's real estate. Maybe it's something like that. You know, and so often in school, our kids aren't really exposed to that kind of thing. So what we want to do is help them feel a little bit of power, help them feel good about themselves, like what I talked about here with the self-esteem and the independence and that kind of thing. Lots of times the kids are sort of particularly immature. They just develop a little bit more slowly, and kids develop at all different rates, but lots of times you'll see kind of an emotional immaturity, and they're still very selfish, very much thinking that they're sort of the middle of the solar system, as if they're the sun. And I kind of use this analogy sometimes when I talk to people, which is that when you're a little kid, you think you're the sun, and the planets revolve around you, and everything revolves around you. And what happens as we get older is we realize we're just one of those billion stars up there, and everything doesn't revolve around us. And of course, it's sort of a painful realization in a way, is that, you know, it's where we come to terms with sort of our existence in an interesting way. And so for a lot of kids, you know, they develop more slowly, and they have that immaturity, and they're still very much all emotion and haven't developed the kind of cognitive stuff and those processes. So again, as I talked about in the 7 strategies, this is something that puts kids at risk, is their immaturity, and how do we address that? We try to help build their maturity by helping them gain some measure of independence and helping them think their way through things. And the last of these 3 things is what I call the identity vacuum, and I think I came up with that term on my own. Maybe I'm wrong. Every time I think I have an original idea, I find that somebody came up upon it before me. But what the identity vacuum is lack of things that they identify with, because during the teenage period, that's what we do. We figure out who we are. Okay, we separate from our family. Okay, we start having relationships with other people who aren't in our family of origin, and we figure out who we are. Are we a student? Are we an athlete? Are we a musician? Are we an artist? You know, are we what? If kids don't have positive things to fill their identity with in our culture, it will be filled with negative things. And there's just too many negative things around, and I think our culture has gotten so permissive in some ways, you know, probably to its detriment, that if there's open space there, and if kids don't really develop themselves, they'll find bad things to fill it up with. And so we want to try to encourage them from the beginning to develop their skills and have that sort of broad-minded idea about, I can be this, I can be that. If they're athletic, you know, push that whole idea, support what it is. If they're good at one subject in school, don't harp on the other subject so much. Encourage that one thing. We have a lot of kids, and maybe they're good at science, but they're not good at English, they're not so good at math, but they love science, and you know, we have a few kids like this. I love marine biology. You encourage that kind of thing, so they start taking on that identity. That's what gives them strength. That's what makes them less vulnerable to the negative things that will come along. I'm saying thank you, and I'm saying thank you here, because I'm going to wrap up there. But again, just going through, I'm going to quiz you guys now on those on those 7 strategies. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to go over it one more time, and I know I've done it a few times. You're looking to be a Zen master. You're looking for a different way of being. And the way I would equate it is, when I come into my job here, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody in their jobs or their lives, if I come in and I say to myself in advance, nothing's going to get to me today, I'm feeling good, and I am invulnerable. Nothing, no matter what gets thrown at me, I'm just going to take it in stride. If I give myself that little pep talk going in, I tend to do better. I tend to be less reactive. Because if I come in with the opposite point of view and I say, you know, crap's going to happen, I will find it, you know, because your mind sort of leads you to wherever your mind is set up to lead you. So with your kids, set your mind up to be positive and be that shock absorber again, rather than that nuclear reactor. Remember, it's take responsibility for the relationship, understand that you have a big part in it, bend over backwards to show your kids respect, parent with purpose, be happy, understand the dynamics, be a good conversationalist to encourage thinking, and be a good negotiator so that you can manage your leverage, and you teach your kids about give and take so that they can go out in the world and understand that that's the way relationships work. And I think I'll wrap there. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. You know, when I was an intern, I had a supervisor, and she gave me a book to read, and I read the book, and I came back, and she said, "What'd you think of it?" And I said, "You know, I kind of liked it, but to tell you the truth, I think I only got like one good thing out of it." And she said, "Well, at least you got one good thing out of it." And she wasn't necessarily very wise, but she said a really wise thing. She said, "That's the way I approach everything. If I get just one good thing out of that, then I think it's worthwhile." And so that's how I take the pressure off myself when I do a presentation. I say to you guys, if you just got one thing out of this, I'm happy. So go forward, and again, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.